Stories are everywhere, but it doesn't necessarily mean we can write one. I would like to focus on that distinction right away. As human beings, we are very, very good at understanding stories. In fact, that's probably the biggest part of what we do as human beings is listening to stories of others and interpreting these stories in the light of what we live ourselves. And when you read a book or when you watch a movie, you immediately pick up the story which is behind it, and you usually appreciate it or you hate it. But you have a natural reaction to it. It's very intuitive. When you have to think about a story, you have to remember that this story has been crafted by other people during years. And if it's a movie, it's a script writer. If it's a book writer. Appreciating the story or not doesn't mean you can write one. In fact, this is almost impossible for someone who didn't spend years doing that. And this is why we will see that there is a massive distinction between the two types of stories. We will dig into the first type of story and the second one. Stories are everywhere, but it doesn't mean you can write one or I can write one. We are very good at understanding how a story is unfolding and following it and feeling good or not because of that story. But it doesn't mean that we can read a story that immediately translates in I can write a story. Most often a writer would take probably 10 years to write a book that you will consume in a couple of days and enjoy or not. So we are very good judge of if a story works or not, but it doesn't mean we can produce it. In fact, if you look at the entire world of attention, all the industries working into producing stories, you will find a couple of patterns in the way they tell stories. I'm going to describe them so that for your general culture, you will understand a little bit better how stories are built. For instance, if you take Star Wars, or if you take Romeo and Juliet, or if you take The Hunger Games, these three stories rely on the exact same dramatic structure. I will explain what a dramatic structure is, but you will have to see that by yourself when you watch a movie or when you read a book. You might not perceive it entirely, unless you're very interested in storytelling at its core level. But you will start to recognize certain patterns. In fact, the dramatic triangle that is the fundament of these three particular movies, and Romeo and Juliet was a book before, as you can remember, is called the Karpman theory. And the Karpman theory is interesting because it's probably 95% of all Hollywood movies nowadays and a very large part of commercial advertising as well. It relies on three characters. The first character is called a victim. And the second character is usually the rescuer. The third character is a persecutor. And these three characters interplay together. I will show you a quick video on how your brain interprets that particular combination of characters. So what did you feel watching this video? I'm pretty sure you felt like this small circle, the victim was trying to escape and the villain was attacking and finally the hero came to the rescue. And that's a thought experiment that was done in the 50s so as to see that people kind of transfer stories on top of anything, and in this case three shapes moving around on a table. So that's why actually the quality of that video is not that great, because that's the original experiment run in 1946. What we see in this triangle, this dramatic triangle, is these three characters always play a role. And if you think about it now, applied to Star Wars, as I said before, or applied to Romeo and Juliet, or applied to the Hunger Games, you will see that there is you will always find a villain, someone who's putting pressure on top of a victim, and then the hero has to come into this interplay and suddenly balance the entire problem. Most of the persecutors we know would fit into one of these categories. There are many of them, but for instance, a disease can be a persecutor, or the financial crisis, terrorists, sharks. If you like dinosaurs as a persecutor, they're pretty powerful. A jealous lover in the case of Romeo and Juliet. Becoming adult in the case of most of the teenager movies of the last decade. Eurosceptics, which are persecutors very present in the head of people in Brussels. And finally, the biggest villain of all, Darth Vader. 95% of the stories coming from Hollywood would rely on this particular triangle. And actually, if you didn't know about it, it's probably that you will never be able to tell a story that is worth reading in a book or in a script or in a video. Actually, it's not your job most of the time. So that's pretty normal that you wouldn't pay a lot of attention to storytelling structure. Why I'm explaining that particular storytelling structure, it's because I believe our role as communication officers is pretty much different. We need to understand what makes a good story, so this is the module, but we have to produce another kind of stories. And this is what we will cover in the next chapters. In this module, we've seen that stories are of a very specific form, that usually they are reserved to professional storytellers, people you can eventually hire. But now we want to know what we can do ourselves. And this is the point of the next chapter.